She shouted on the call to the police, "Come fast! I've caught the most wanted thief in the city." It was a day that started like any other in the quiet, tree-lined park nestled in the heart of town. The autumn air was crisp, with a chill that spoke of approaching winter, yet the morning sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow across the fallen leaves scattered along the paths. Children laughed in the distance, joggers passed each other with friendly nods, and the hum of a peaceful day seemed to envelop the space. Seated on a park bench, his shoulders slightly slumped, was a young black teen, no older than 16. His name was Jaden. Jaden wasn't like other boys his age. He was quiet, thoughtful, a little shy. That day he wasn't feeling well, but he didn't want to stay home and worry his mother, a woman who had more on her plate than most could imagine. So he joined her on her morning errands, hoping the fresh air might revive him. Little did he know that in a matter of minutes, his entire world would be shaken by something he'd only heard about in stories or seen in movies. A look, a gesture, an accusation that would make him feel invisible, powerless, and accused. As he rested, he didn't notice a woman, a white woman in her mid-30s, jogging nearby, clutching her purse close to her side. She glanced at him once, then again, each time with a look that grew darker, her mind clouded with suspicion. In her eyes, Jaden wasn't a tired teenager resting on a bench. He was a threat, a stranger who didn't belong, a thief waiting to strike. Her hand clutched her purse tighter. Then it happened. Her purse slipped from her shoulder as she jogged, falling to the ground without her realizing it. She continued running for a few steps before she noticed, and when she did, she whipped around, her gaze landing immediately on Jaden. "You! What do you think you're doing?" she shouted, her voice breaking the peaceful morning with a note of accusation so sharp it sent a ripple of unease through the nearby crowd. Jaden looked up, confused and alarmed. "Mom," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. She stormed over to him, her eyes blazing. "You took my purse! Don't lie to me!" She searched the ground, her purse lying just a few feet away, yet her gaze stayed fixed on him, unyielding in its judgment. "Ma'am, I didn't touch your purse," Jaden said softly, his voice faltering as he looked into her furious eyes. He wanted to stand up, to walk away, but he felt frozen, pinned by her accusing glare. He wasn't sure if it was fear or disbelief that kept him rooted to the spot, but he felt his cheeks grow hot with embarrassment, his heart pounding with something he couldn't yet name. But she wasn't listening. Her mind was made up, and she wanted everyone to know it. She pointed her finger at him, her voice rising in volume and anger as she turned to the gathering onlookers. "He tried to steal my purse. I saw him just sitting here, waiting for a moment to grab it." Jaden's eyes widened, a look of hurt crossing his face as he struggled to find his voice. He wanted to defend himself, to tell her she was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he looked around, searching for a friendly face, someone who might believe him, who might see that he was innocent. As if fate itself were answering his silent plea, his mother appeared, walking briskly toward him with a concerned look in her eyes. She was an unassuming woman, modestly dressed, her hair neatly tied back, her expression gentle yet firm. To those who knew her, she was a beacon of fairness and humility, a woman who had worked tirelessly for her community. But to the strangers in the park that day, she was just another face, a mother defending her child. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with worry as she looked from the woman to her son, her heart sinking at the fear she saw in his eyes. The woman turned to her, her voice dripping with disdain. "Is this your son?" she sneered. "Well, maybe you should teach him not to steal." The words struck like a slap. Jaden's mother felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she swallowed it down, determined to handle the situation with the dignity she was known for. "My son did nothing wrong," she said firmly, her gaze steady as she met the woman's angry eyes. "Please, let's not jump to conclusions." The woman scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "I know what I saw," she said, her tone filled with contempt. "These kids, they think they can just take whatever they want." The crowd began to murmur, some people looking away, others watching with uncomfortable curiosity. Jaden's mother took a deep breath, her heart aching for her son, who stood there, shoulders slumped, his head bowed as if he were carrying the weight of her words. She wanted to reach out, to pull him close, to shield him from the hateful gaze directed at him, but she knew that, in this moment, she had to be strong. For him. Just then, police officers arrived, summoned by the woman's frantic call. Without hesitation, they turned to Jaden, ignoring his mother's attempts to explain, and grabbed him by the collar, pulling him forward as if he were a criminal, as if he were already guilty. "No!" his mother shouted, her voice breaking as she reached for him. "He's my son, and he hasn't done anything wrong." But her words fell on deaf ears. The officers, guided by the woman's accusation and their own biases, ignored her protests, treating her words as little more than background noise. Desperate, she tried again, this time louder. "I am the mayor of this city. This is my son, and you're making a mistake." The officers paused, looking at her with surprise and then amusement. One of them let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Right," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "And I'm the president." Jaden's mother felt a cold fury grip her heart. She had always believed in the power of words, in the strength of reason. But here, in this moment, she realized that her position, her authority, meant nothing to those who couldn't see beyond her skin, beyond their own assumptions. She was just a mother, powerless, watching as her son was taken away, his innocence shattered by a moment of prejudice that none of them would soon forget. A mother's stand. As Jaden was led away, his mother watched in disbelief, her heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and frustration. She had spent years serving her community, leading with integrity and humility, striving to make her city a place where people could feel safe, regardless of their backgrounds. But in this moment, none of her achievements, none of her sacrifices seemed to matter. All that mattered was her son, her quiet, gentle Jaden, being dragged away as if he were a criminal, his dignity trampled by assumptions that ran far deeper than a simple misunderstanding. The crowd around them had begun to disperse, some casting sympathetic glances, others averting their eyes, as if they didn't want to be part of this uncomfortable truth. But she didn't care about them. She only cared about her son, who had done nothing to deserve this humiliation. She felt her anger rise, stronger than she'd ever felt before, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew she couldn't afford to lose control, not here, not now. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and walked up to the officers, her voice steady, filled with the quiet authority of someone who had fought her way to a position where people had to listen. "Excuse me," she said firmly, making eye contact with the officer who held Jaden by the collar. "This is my son, and I demand you release him immediately." The officer looked down at her, his expression unreadable, and for a moment she saw a flicker of hesitation. But then he tightened his grip on Jaden, his face hardening, as if to remind her of his power in this moment. "Ma'am, we received a report that your son attempted to steal this woman's purse," he said, his voice laced with irritation, as if her presence was more of an inconvenience than a legitimate protest. She met his gaze, unwavering. "That report is false. My son is innocent, and I have no intention of letting this continue without a thorough investigation." The woman who had made the accusation snorted, crossing her arms with a smirk. "Oh, please," she sneered, rolling her eyes. "This isn't some misunderstanding. I know what I saw." But Jaden's mother ignored her. Instead, she looked straight at the officer, her voice filled with the strength of a mother who would do anything to protect her child. "You're making a mistake. My son was simply sitting on a bench, minding his own business. I've raised him better than to be accused like this, and I won't stand by while he's treated like a common criminal." The officer hesitated again, glancing at his partner as if unsure of what to do. For a moment it seemed like her words were reaching him, that he might release Jaden and listen. But then the woman's voice cut through the air once more, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please," she scoffed, her face twisted in disdain. "Just because you say he's innocent doesn't mean he is. I saw him there looking shifty. You people think you can do whatever you want without consequence." Jaden's mother felt the sting of those words, the way they dismissed her humanity, her dignity, as if she and her son were less than simply because they didn't fit into this woman's narrow view of who belonged. She felt the heat of tears pricking her eyes but refused to let them fall. Instead, she took a deep breath, her voice growing softer but somehow more powerful, more resolute. "Please," she said, addressing the officer with a calm that belied the storm within her. "Take a closer look at what's happening here. You're making a decision based on assumptions, on prejudice, not on evidence or truth. My son deserves the chance to be heard, to be seen for who he truly is." But the officer shook his head, his jaw tight, as if determined to prove his authority, his control over the situation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cold, "I suggest you step back." For a moment she felt helpless, the weight of the world pressing down on her. But then something shifted within her, a realization that this was not just about her son, but about every child, every person who had ever been judged unfairly. She would not back down, not now, not ever. Her voice rose, steady and filled with conviction. "I am the mayor of this city," she said, letting the words hang in the air, hoping they would pierce through the officer's defenses, through the crowd's indifference. "And as mayor, I demand you release my son and investigate this incident thoroughly." The officer's expression faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face as he looked at her, finally seeing the determination, the authority, and the pain in her eyes. But before he could respond, the accusing woman scoffed, her face twisting in disbelief and derision. "You?" she laughed, a sound dripping with scorn. "The mayor?" "I don't think so." The crowd murmured, some people glancing at each other with a mix of confusion and disbelief. The officer's grip on Jaden's collar loosened, but he didn't release him, torn between duty and doubt. Jaden's mother felt her heart ache with the weight of her position, of the way she had to fight not only for her son but for the respect she deserved. But she stood her ground, unflinching. "Yes," she said quietly but firmly, "I am the mayor, and I demand justice for my son." The officer seemed to waver, caught between the accusing woman's outrage and the quiet, powerful authority of the woman standing before him. And in that moment, Jaden's mother knew that no matter what happened next, she would not give up, would not back down. She would fight for her son, for her community, and for the justice that had eluded so many for so long. This was her stand, a stand not just for her son, but for every mother, every child who had ever faced a world too quick to judge, too slow to understand, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. A call to action. As the police car pulled away with Jaden inside, his mother felt a surge of helplessness wash over her. She watched, her fists clenched, her mind racing with a mixture of fear, anger, and a fierce determination. She had spent her life dedicated to justice, working tirelessly to make her city a place of equality, safety, and respect. And now, in this moment, that very city had failed her son, failed every principle she had worked so hard to uphold. But she was not one to be defeated easily. This wasn't the first time she had faced obstacles, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Yet this time it felt personal in a way that shook her to her core. Her son, her gentle, kind-hearted Jaden, was being treated like a criminal. his innocence disregarded, his dignity stripped away by prejudice and assumptions that cut far deeper than words. She took a deep breath, pulling out her phone, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. This would not end here. She would not let her son be another victim in a long line of injustices. Her first call was to the highest-ranking police official in the city, a man she had worked alongside on numerous occasions, someone who had always assured her of his commitment to justice and fairness. She pressed his number, each ring feeling like a lifetime as she waited, hoping he would pick up, hoping he would listen. Finally, he answered, his voice calm and professional. "Mayor, what can I do for you?" Without missing a beat, she explained the situation, her words sharp, filled with an urgency that came from a place of both fear and righteous anger. "My son has just been wrongfully detained by your officers," she said, each word measured and deliberate. "He was accused of a crime he didn't commit, treated with disrespect, and taken in without any evidence, solely on the word of a single biased witness." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that told her he was listening, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. "This is unacceptable," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I need you to take immediate action, review the case, speak to your officers, and ensure my son's release. This cannot be swept under the rug." The official responded, his tone cautious but respectful. "I understand, Mayor. I'll look into it right away. I'll make sure the officers involved are questioned, and we'll address this with the urgency it deserves." But she wasn't done. One call was not enough. Her mind raced, thinking of everyone she needed to contact, everyone who would listen and understand the gravity of this situation. She called the head of the city council, explaining the incident in detail, demanding that they hold the police department accountable. She called local community leaders, those who had fought alongside her for years, who had believed in her vision for a fair and just city. She called the media, knowing that this story needed to be heard, that the world needed to see what her son and countless others endured because of baseless prejudice. As the calls went out, as the story spread, she felt a sense of purpose building within her, a fire igniting that she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about her son anymore. It was about every child, every parent, every family that had been wronged, every person who had been judged and dismissed based on nothing more than their appearance. By the time she had finished, she felt both exhausted and invigorated, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. She knew there would be consequences, that she was pushing against a system that had long been resistant to change. But she also knew that this was a fight worth waging, a battle she couldn't afford to lose, not for herself, not for her son, and not for the countless others who would come after him. As she hung up the phone, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't just a mother fighting for her son. She was a leader, a symbol of resilience and strength for her community. And she would see this through, no matter how long it took, no matter how many obstacles lay in her path. She looked around the quiet park, the scene of the incident still fresh in her mind, her son's frightened face etched in her memory. She knew that from this moment on, things would be different. She would not rest until justice was served, not just for Jaden, but for every person who had been silenced, every voice that had been ignored. With a final steadying breath, she turned and began the walk to the police station, her heart pounding, her mind set. This was more than a call to action. This was the beginning of a revolution, a reckoning for every injustice that had gone unanswered, and she would lead it, with the strength of a mother's love, the power of a leader's resolve, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who would not be silenced. The reckoning begins. As she arrived at the police station, Jaden's mother felt a chill settle over her, a mix of anxiety and determination as she stepped inside the imposing building. This was where her son was held, treated as if he were guilty simply for existing in a place where someone thought he didn't belong. Her heart ached, but she held her head high, each step filled with purpose. The station was bustling with activity, officers moving about with files and radios, unaware of the storm about to descend upon them. But as she entered, there was a shift in the air, an awareness spreading through the room as people recognized her. The whispers began, glances were exchanged, and officers who had once ignored her presence now straightened, sensing her authority and the determination in her stride. It was then that a high-ranking FBI officer, a man known for his fairness and integrity, appeared, approaching her with a look of respect and concern. "Mayor," he greeted her, his voice calm, yet filled with gravity. "I heard about the situation. I'm here to ensure that justice is served." Relief washed over her, though it was tempered with the lingering hurt and anger for what her son had endured. She nodded, meeting his gaze with the same seriousness. "Thank you. All I ask is for a fair investigation and for my son to be treated with the respect he deserves." He nodded, his expression firm. "I assure you, Mayor, that's exactly what will happen." She followed him down the hall, past rows of desks where officers watched her with uneasy glances. Her presence was a reminder that they were accountable, that they couldn't hide behind ranks and badges when the truth was staring them in the face. They arrived at a room where her son was being held, his face pale and eyes downcast. She felt a pang in her chest, but she took a deep breath, knowing she had to be strong. For him, for herself, for everyone watching. As she entered the room, Jaden looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. She crossed the room in an instant, pulling him into a tight embrace, feeling the weight of his fear, his confusion, his hurt. "It's okay, Jaden," she whispered, her voice soft but unwavering. "You did nothing wrong. We're going to make this right." The FBI officer looked on, his expression one of quiet understanding. He signaled to the officers who had arrested Jaden, calling them into the room to face her. Their faces were pale, nervous, knowing that their actions were under scrutiny. They shuffled uncomfortably, stealing glances at each other as if looking for support, but they found none. Jaden's mother turned to face them, her gaze sharp, her voice steady. "My son was wrongfully accused, treated like a criminal based on nothing but an assumption. I want answers. I want accountability." One of the officers, clearly unnerved, stammered, "Ma'am, we were just following protocol. We didn't mean any disrespect." She narrowed her eyes, her voice laced with controlled anger. "Protocol doesn't mean ignoring the truth. Protocol doesn't mean treating an innocent boy like a threat simply because someone pointed a finger. My son is not just a statistic, not just a number. He's a human being who deserves dignity and respect." The FBI officer stepped forward, addressing the officers with a calm but authoritative tone. "This will be thoroughly investigated, and if there was misconduct, there will be consequences." His words carried weight, a reminder that this was no ordinary mother but the mayor, a woman who had the power and influence to bring change. The officers nodded, their faces filled with regret, though whether it was for their actions or for being caught was unclear. Jaden's mother knew she had made her point, but this was only the beginning. She wouldn't be satisfied with apologies or empty promises. She wanted action, a tangible change that would prevent this from happening to anyone else. With Jaden by her side, she left the police station, her heart heavy yet resolved. She had shown them that they couldn't act with impunity, that they were accountable for their actions. This was her reckoning, not just for herself or her son, but for every voice that had been silenced, every life that had been disregarded. She knew there was still much work to be done, but she was ready. This was her fight, her duty, and she would see it through to the end. exposing a pattern of racism. As the dust settled from the initial incident, something unexpected began to unfold. People from the community started coming forward, reaching out to Jaden's mother, eager to share their own stories, their own encounters with the woman who had falsely accused her son. The incident had awakened something in the community, a spark that urged others to finally speak up, to shed light on the pattern of discrimination that had simmered beneath the surface for far too long. One by one, the stories emerged. Neighbors, friends, even strangers came to the mayor with tales of the same woman and her history of unfairly targeting people of color in the neighborhood. Some had been confronted by her while simply walking through the park. Others had been the subject of her baseless accusations while shopping, jogging, or simply existing in spaces where she believed they didn't belong. Each story was a painful reminder of the prejudice that lurked beneath the seemingly calm surface of their community. It was a community that prided itself on being inclusive, yet here was undeniable evidence of someone wielding her privilege like a weapon, using it to keep people in their place, to control and instill fear where she had no right to do so. Jaden's mother listened to each person, her heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and anger. As a leader, she had believed in her city's capacity for fairness and justice, but now she saw the cracks, the places where that faith had been misplaced. She knew that this was no longer just about Jaden. It was about every person in her city who had ever been made to feel small, who had been stripped of their dignity because of one woman's hatefulness. Determined to take action, she called a meeting with the city council and the police department, inviting community members to come forward and share their experiences. She wanted to create a safe space where people could voice their grievances, where they would be heard and supported. The meeting was packed, people spilling out of the room, standing along the walls, their faces a mix of anger, fear, and hope. One by one they spoke, recounting their experiences, describing the times they had felt the sting of the woman's harsh words, the weight of her unfounded accusations. The council members listened in stunned silence, many of them visibly moved, their expressions reflecting both shock and shame as the stories piled one upon another. The police officers present shifted uncomfortably, realizing the role they had played in enabling this woman's behavior, the times they had dismissed complaints or looked the other way. And then, as the testimonies continued, it became clear that this was not an isolated problem. This woman had been allowed to continue her behavior because the community and even the authorities had failed to hold her accountable. It was a painful truth, one that cut to the core of the city's identity, challenging its sense of itself as a place of justice and equality. But Jaden's mother saw this as an opportunity, a chance to turn pain into progress, to take these stories and use them as fuel for change. She looked around the room, her gaze steady and filled with resolve. "We cannot ignore this any longer," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. "This isn't just about one woman's actions. It's about all of us, about the ways we've allowed this behavior to persist. Today, we make a choice to be better, to demand more from ourselves and each other." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. And in that moment, they understood. This was the beginning of a new chapter, a reckoning for the prejudices they had tolerated, the injustices they had ignored. Jaden's mother knew it wouldn't be easy, that real change would require time, persistence, and a commitment from everyone involved. But she also knew that they had taken the first step, that they had exposed the truth, and that there was no turning back. With the community's support, she filed an official complaint against the woman, documenting the incidents that had come to light and ensuring that each story was heard and recorded. The police and city council agreed to investigate thoroughly, acknowledging the failure to act sooner and vowing to prevent such discrimination in the future. As she left the meeting, Jaden's mother felt a sense of accomplishment, not for herself, but for every person who had spoken up, for every voice that had joined hers in demanding justice. She knew this was only the beginning, that there was still much work to be done, but she felt a newfound hope. Her community was finally facing its truth, and she was ready to lead them toward healing, toward a future where no one would have to endure the pain her son had suffered. A sentence to redemption. The court hearing was packed, the air heavy with anticipation as the accused woman faced the judge. She sat stiffly, her face pale, the arrogance that once defined her now replaced by a look of desperation. She had never expected her actions to catch up with her like this, to be held accountable in a court of law for the countless times she had used her privilege to intimidate, control, and harm those she deemed undesirable in her world. The community had rallied behind Jaden and his mother, standing as one voice against the prejudice that had festered for far too long. Neighbors had come forward, sharing statements that painted a clear picture of the woman's pattern of harassment. For years, she had targeted black families and individuals, treating them as if they didn't belong, projecting her own insecurities and fears onto innocent people simply going about their lives. And now, finally, justice was within reach. The judge, a stern and thoughtful figure, listened carefully, his gaze unwavering as he took in each testimony, each piece of evidence that illustrated the extent of her wrongdoing. He was not a man of leniency when it came to abuse of power, and it was clear that he saw this case for what it was, a chance to set a precedent, to make a statement that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. When it was time for sentencing, he spoke with a gravity that made the entire room fall silent. "Your actions," he began, addressing the woman directly, "have caused pain and distress to individuals and families in this community for far too long. You used your privilege not as a shield, but as a weapon, harming those who did nothing to deserve your scorn. You have violated the very principles of decency and respect that hold our society together." The woman looked down, her hands trembling as the weight of his words pressed upon her. She had never considered the consequences of her actions, never thought that she might one day have to face those she had wronged. The judge continued, his voice unyielding. "For your repeated offenses, I am sentencing you to 2 months in jail. However, I believe that punishment alone is not enough to repair the harm you've caused. For 2 weeks following your release, you will spend each day working in the homes of black families within this community. You will listen to their stories, understand their struggles, and see the world from their perspective. Should you fail to comply, your sentence will be extended by an additional 2 years. A collective gasp echoed through the room. This sentence was unconventional, bold, and for many, a powerful symbol of justice served. It was a punishment designed not just to penalize, but to force the woman to confront her prejudice, to experience the lives of those she had judged so harshly, to face the very people she had tried to silence. Jaden's mother watched, her heart a mixture of emotions. She had fought for this moment, for a consequence that would make a real impact, something that would resonate beyond just a jail term. She didn't want revenge, she wanted change. She wanted this woman to see the humanity in those she had wronged, to understand the pain her actions had caused, and to grow from the experience. The woman looked up, shock and fear etched across her face as the weight of the sentence sank in. She realized that she could no longer hide behind her privilege, her power. For the first time, she would have to face the truth of her actions, to confront the people she had harmed, to see them not as others, but as neighbors, as equals, as people with stories and dreams and lives just as valid as her own. Jaden's mother felt a quiet satisfaction, not from the woman's fear, but from the hope that this sentence might actually lead to change. She had spent her life fighting for a better world, and now, in this moment, she saw a glimmer of that world coming to life, a world where justice wasn't just about punishment, but about understanding, redemption, and growth. As the court adjourned, people began to leave, murmuring with a sense of resolution, a feeling that justice had been served in a way that was both powerful and transformative. Jaden's mother remained seated for a moment, watching the woman as she was led away, wondering if she would truly learn from this experience, if her heart might finally be open to the humanity she had long ignored. She knew it was a risk, that change might not come easily, but she also knew that this was a step, a beginning, a chance for growth and understanding that had been so desperately needed in their community. And as she left the courthouse, hand in hand with her son, she felt a sense of peace, a belief that no matter the outcome, she had done her part to pave the way for a world rooted in empathy, respect, and true justice. A mayor's grace. Despite everything that had happened, Jaden's mother, the mayor, couldn't shake the feeling of compassion in her heart. She had been a leader for years, had faced countless challenges, and had seen the darker sides of human nature. Yet, she still believed in the power of forgiveness, in the idea that people could change if they were given the right opportunities. As the days passed following the woman's sentencing, she found herself struggling with a mixture of satisfaction for justice served and a deep desire to help guide her community toward healing rather than division. Many of her friends and supporters were outraged that she would even consider speaking out on behalf of the woman who had wronged her son. They argued that the punishment was deserved, that it was time for this woman to face the consequences of her actions without leniency. But the mayor felt a different responsibility, one that went beyond retribution. Her goal was not to create further bitterness or resentment, but to cultivate an environment where empathy and understanding could flourish. So, she took a step that few anticipated. She reached out to the judge who had delivered the sentence, requesting a private meeting to discuss an alternative approach. "Your Honor," she began when they met in his chambers, "I believe in the sentence you've given. I believe it holds the potential for true change. But I also believe that punishment without guidance may not lead to the growth we hope for." The judge regarded her thoughtfully, his brow furrowing as he listened. He respected her. Everyone did, and he could see the sincerity in her eyes. "What do you propose?" he asked, intrigued by her determination. The mayor took a deep breath, her voice calm and steady. "I propose that instead of leaving her to face her punishment alone, we create a mentorship program. Let her meet with leaders, with members of the community, people who can help her understand the lives she's impacted, who can help her confront her biases, not with anger, but with a chance to learn, to reflect." The judge considered this, his expression softening as he recognized the wisdom in her words. "You're asking me to show leniency," he said slowly, but not without respect. "I'm asking you to offer a path to redemption," she replied, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I want her to see our community not as a collection of faces to judge or fear, but as individuals with unique stories and perspectives. Let her work, let her serve, but let's also give her a chance to understand." After a long pause, the judge nodded. "You've shown more grace than most would in your situation, Mayor," he said, a hint of admiration in his tone. "Very well. I'll add a mentorship component to her sentence. She'll work alongside community members, and she'll meet with you regularly to discuss her progress. But know that this is her last chance. If she resists, the original sentence will stand." The mayor smiled, relief flooding through her. She knew this wasn't just about the woman's punishment. It was about setting an example, showing her community that justice and compassion could coexist. It was about teaching everyone, including her son, that strength was not always in the ability to punish, but in the courage to forgive. Word of her actions spread quickly, and the community was divided. Some praised her, admiring her strength and her vision. Others were furious, questioning why she would offer compassion to someone who had caused her family so much pain. But the mayor stayed true to her convictions, knowing that her decision would inspire others to look beyond anger, beyond fear, and to see the potential for change in even the most difficult of situations. As the woman began her sentence, working in the homes of black families, she was no longer met with silent contempt, but with the firm guidance of mentors who shared their experiences, their stories, their lives. She was forced to confront her own biases, to hear firsthand the impact of her actions, to feel the weight of the hurt she had caused. And as she sat in weekly meetings with the mayor, discussing what she had learned, something began to shift within her. The mayor watched, hopeful yet reserved, as the woman's defensive walls started to crumble, replaced by a tentative understanding, a growing awareness of the humanity she had so long ignored. This was not an easy journey, nor was it a guarantee of change, but it was a beginning, a chance, however fragile, for true transformation. And the mayor, with her heart full of grace, held on to that hope, believing that even in the hardest of hearts, there was room for redemption. The beginning of change. As the woman's sentence continued, something remarkable began to happen in the community. Jaden's mother, the mayor, had sparked a wave of conversations that went beyond the courtroom, beyond the initial incident in the park. People started talking openly about their own experiences, their fears, and the subtle ways discrimination had affected their lives. The community, once silent, was finding its voice, and the woman who had once been the source of division found herself at the center of these conversations, not as a symbol of hate, but as a reluctant participant in the journey toward understanding. Each day, as she visited the homes of black families, worked beside them, listened to their stories, and felt the weight of her actions, the woman could feel her perspective slowly shifting. She had spent years seeing others as strangers, as threats, her assumptions clouding her understanding. But now, as she listened to their stories of resilience, of strength, of survival, she began to see them not as others, but as people, neighbors with dreams, struggles, and aspirations as real and valid as her own. For the community, watching this transformation unfold was both painful and healing. Jaden's mother led town hall meetings, inviting people of all backgrounds to come together, to share their stories, to listen, and to understand. It was an opportunity for the city to confront its own biases, to question the small ways prejudice had shaped their daily lives, to acknowledge and uproot the subtle divisions that had gone unspoken for so long. Jaden, too, became a part of this change. Initially shaken by the incident, he found himself drawn to the community discussions, finding strength in his mother's leadership, courage in the voices around him. He began to share his experience with others, speaking about the fear he had felt that day in the park, the humiliation of being wrongly accused, but also the support and love that had followed. His words resonated, especially with other young people who had faced similar struggles, who had felt the sting of prejudice in ways they hadn't known how to express. Through it all, Jaden's mother stood as a pillar of strength, her vision for justice expanding with each story shared, each life touched. She knew this journey would not end with a single sentence, a single courtroom decision. Real change was a slow, often painful process, one that required constant effort, compassion, and resilience. But she was willing to lead her community through it, to guide them toward a future where understanding replaced judgment, where empathy replaced fear. As the woman's sentence neared its end, there was a final gathering, a community event organized by the mayor herself. Families from all backgrounds came together, sharing food, laughter, and stories. It was a celebration not of the woman's punishment, but of the progress they had all made, of the conversations they had started and the barriers they had broken down. The woman attended too, standing quietly in the back, observing the unity around her, feeling the weight of her past actions and the strange, tentative hope of a second chance. For the first time, she saw her community for what it truly was. A tapestry of lives woven together, each one different, yet fundamentally the same. Jaden's mother addressed the crowd, her voice filled with pride and gratitude. "This journey we've started is just the beginning," she said, her eyes sweeping over the faces before her. "We still have a long way to go, but every step we take, every conversation we have, brings us closer to the future we want to build. A future where each of us is seen, valued, and respected, not in spite of our differences, but because of them." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices united in a shared commitment to change. And as Jaden's mother stood there, watching her community come together, she felt a deep, deep, abiding peace. She had fought for justice, but what she had found was something even greater. A spark of hope, a glimpse of a world where unity and understanding could triumph over fear and division. It was only the beginning, but it was a beginning she would cherish, a beginning that promised a brighter future for her son, her community, and perhaps even for those who had once been lost in the shadows of prejudice. This, she knew, was the true power of change, the courage to begin, the strength to continue, and the grace to believe in a future where every voice was heard, every story valued, and every heart open to understanding.